is the way we talk to the creator of the universe. It's how we connect with the one who holds all power, all wisdom, all healing, and all hope. But too often we treat prayer like a last resort when it should be our first response. We wait until we're at the end of ourselves, the end of our strength, the end of our understanding, and then we finally get on our knees. But why wait until the crisis to plug into the power? Why treat communication with God as a backup plan when it was meant to be our foundation? There is a reason why Jesus, who was the Son of God, prayed constantly. He didn't just pray before miracles. He didn't just pray in moments of suffering. He lived in constant communion with the Father. In the early morning hours, in the quiet moments, and even when crowds surrounded him, he prayed. If Jesus needed prayer to fulfill his mission on earth, how much more do we need it? Prayer is not just about asking for things. It's about relationship. It's about intimacy. It's about plugging into the source of life. Every time you whisper a prayer, whether it's filled with words or just tears, heaven hears. God is not distant. He's not hiding. He's not too busy. He's right there, waiting for you to talk to him, waiting for you to open your heart, waiting for you to reconnect. But I get it. Life gets busy. We're pulled in so many directions. Work, family, pain, pressure, temptation, fear. And in all that noise, the voice of God can seem far away. But he hasn't moved. We've just let go of the lifeline. We've tried to survive the storm on our own, and we wonder why we're anxious, why we're angry, why we feel lost. It's because we've stopped talking to the one who guides, protects, and provides. Prayer is not for the perfect. It's for the desperate. It's not for those who have it all together. It's for those who know they don't. If you think your mess disqualifies you from prayer, you've believed a lie. Your brokenness is the very reason you must pray, because God isn't looking for polished words. He's looking for surrendered hearts. You don't need fancy phrases. You don't need to sound like a preacher. Just be real, be honest, be open. God responds to sincerity, not performance. Some of us only pray when we're in trouble. We treat God like an emergency contact. But prayer was never meant to be just for crises. It was meant to be a daily conversation, a lifestyle. The same way your lungs need air, your soul needs prayer. The same way a branch needs to stay connected to the vine, we need to stay connected to our source. Because prayer doesn't just change circumstances, it changes us. It changes how we think, how we feel, how we fight, how we love, how we forgive, how we live. And listen, prayer is not always about getting a yes. Sometimes God answers with no or wait. But every prayer gets heard. Every prayer gets answered according to his will, his timing, and his plan. And I promise you this, even when the answer is not what you expected, God always gives you what's best. Because he sees what you can't see. He knows what you don't know, and he loves you more than you'll ever understand. You might say, but I've prayed and nothing changed. My friend, you may be changing and you don't even know it. Sometimes the change starts inside before it shows up outside. Sometimes God is building patience, building faith, building endurance. Don't stop praying just because you don't see immediate results. This isn't fast food. This is eternal nourishment. And some breakthroughs take time. There's power in consistency, power in persistence. When you pray day after day, even when it's hard, even when you feel dry, even when the answer hasn't come, you are saying, God, I trust you more than I trust what I see. And that kind of faith shakes the kingdom of darkness. Prayer isn't just for your personal life either. Prayer has the power to touch your children, your marriage, your workplace, your city, your church, your nation. There are strongholds that won't break until somebody gets on their knees. There are chains that won't fall until somebody cries out to God. There are doors that won't open until somebody prays with faith and boldness. Don't underestimate what happens when you pray. Angels move, demons flee, heaven listens, miracles begin. And most of all, you change. You get anchored, you get clarity, you get peace, you get boldness to stand when others fall. Because prayer doesn't take you away from the storm, it helps you stand strong in the storm. So today, I'm not just calling you to pray, I'm calling you to live in prayer, to make it as natural as breathing, to talk to God in the quiet and in the chaos, to listen in the silence, to cry in the secret place, and to walk with confidence, knowing you are never alone. Because prayer is not a religious duty. It's your divine lifeline. It's how you survive. It's how you grow. It's how you overcome. It's how you live connected to the one who never fails. Keep your lifeline strong. Stay connected. Pray. You see, the world teaches us to hide our weaknesses, to fake it, to keep pushing, keep performing, keep pretending. But God never asked you to be strong on your own. He didn't design you to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. That's his job. What he did give you was a way to access supernatural strength in your human struggle, and that way is prayer. Prayer is where we trade our weakness for his power. It's the place where you come to God with nothing left in your hands, and he fills you with more than you imagined. That's why the enemy will do everything he can to keep you from praying, because he knows that a praying believer is a dangerous believer, someone who refuses to be defined by their circumstance. Someone who knows that weakness isn't the end of the story, because grace steps in right there. Maybe you've been trying to fix everything in your own strength. Maybe you've been trying to fight battles that were never yours to fight. That's why you're drained. That's why you're anxious. That's why you're losing sleep. But God is saying, bring it to me. Lay it down. Let me carry what you were never meant to carry. That happens in prayer. It doesn't take long. It doesn't take fancy words. It just takes honesty, humility, a moment of surrender, because God's strength is made perfect in weakness, but only when we admit we're weak. As long as we're trying to impress, as long as we're trying to act like we've got it all figured out, we miss the very power that was meant to help us rise. Do you know why some people stay stuck? It's not because God isn't willing to help. It's because they won't ask, they won't stop and say, Lord, I can't do this on my own. And so they stay in cycles. Addiction, anger, depression, bitterness, not because they're too weak, but because they're too proud to admit they need divine strength. But when you finally come to the end of yourself and you open your mouth and say, God, help me, that's when things start to shift. That's when peace begins to settle in the middle of your chaos. That's when joy shows up in the middle of your pain. That's when clarity starts to cut through the confusion, not because you worked harder, but because you turned your face toward the only one who can truly restore what's been broken. I've seen people at their absolute lowest, lost everything, betrayed, wounded, alone. And I've seen them fall to their knees in prayer and rise with a strength that shook every demon around them. That's what happens when you pray from a place of weakness. God doesn't just patch you up. He rebuilds you. He strengthens your hands. He steadies your feet. He lifts your head. He breathes life into your lungs again. You might be in a valley right now, but prayer gives you the strength to keep walking through it. It doesn't always remove the storm, but it equips you to stand in the storm, because God never promised life would be easy, but he did promise you wouldn't face it alone. And let me tell you something, there is no shame in being weak. The strongest people I've ever met were the ones who knew how to cry out to God. They didn't wear masks. They didn't pretend. They bled. They broke. But they prayed. And when they prayed, heaven responded. So stop pretending you're okay when you're not. Stop faking strength and call on the real power that's available to you. You weren't meant to walk through this life on your own. You weren't meant to carry that burden by yourself. God is saying, come to me, talk to me. Let me give you rest. Let me fill you again. Because when you pray, your weakness becomes a platform for God's strength. Your pain becomes a setup for his power, and what the enemy meant to destroy you, God will use to develop you. Don't you quit. Don't you walk away from the very presence that's trying to rescue you. Run to him in prayer. Cry if you have to. Be silent if you don't have the words. Just go to the secret place. Go back to the feet of Jesus. That's where the strength is. That's where the healing is. That's where your spirit gets refreshed, your mind gets renewed, and your heart gets restored. You don't need to be strong all the time. You just need to stay connected to the one who is. Prayer is how you do that. It's not weakness to pray. It's power. It's wisdom. It's life. So whatever you're carrying today, whatever you're facing, whatever feels too heavy, bring it to him. Bring it in your weakness and watch him give you strength for the battle, peace for the storm, and grace to stand when others fall. Prayer turns weakness into strength. We come to God in prayer thinking we know what we need. We've got our list, we've got our timeline, we've already mapped out the outcome in our minds. But real prayer doesn't just say, God, do what I want. Real prayer says, God, change me until I want what you want. That's where the power is. That's where the peace is. That's where transformation begins, not just in our circumstances, but in our souls. So many people miss this. They think prayer is like placing an order, fast, specific, and on demand. But God is not a vending machine. He's a loving Father. He's not trying to be efficient with your comfort. He's working to develop your character. And sometimes the most loving thing he can do is not give you what you asked for, but instead give you what you actually need. You see, when we pray with open hands instead of clenched fists, something shifts. We stop wrestling with God and start walking with him. We stop resisting his will and start receiving his wisdom. Prayer becomes less about God adjusting to our desires and more about us adjusting to his divine design. And that's when real peace comes, not because everything around you changes, but because you change. Jesus himself gave us this example. When he prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, facing the cross, he didn't say, God, I refuse this. He said, not my will, but yours be done. Now understand, that wasn't weakness. That was surrender. That was the most powerful moment of alignment in human history, and it happened in prayer. When you start to pray like that, heaven takes notice. You begin to move in sync with God's heartbeat. Your prayers stop bouncing off the ceiling, not because you said all the right words, but because you finally came with the right posture. A surrendered heart is a magnet for God's movement. But let's be honest, it's hard to pray that way. It's hard to say, God, not my will, when everything in you is screaming for control. It's hard to let go of your plan, your timing, your agenda. But here's the truth. Your plan might feel good now, but it can't compare to the purpose God has already prepared. You may be praying for relief, but God is preparing you for release. You may want out, but he's building something in you that can only be formed in the fire. That's why we need to pray not just for results, but for revelation. God, show me what you're doing in this. Show me what you want me to learn. Show me where you're growing me, stretching me, correcting me. That's mature prayer. That's the kind of prayer that turns storms into classrooms, battles into breakthroughs, and delays into development. Because some of us don't need a change in location. We need a change in perspective. Some of us don't need new circumstances. We need renewed minds. That's what happens when your prayer life goes deeper than requests. It becomes about relationship. And in that relationship, God begins to transform you from the inside out. When your will is aligned with his, you can walk in peace even when the situation hasn't shifted. You can be calm in the chaos, steady in the struggle, focused in the fight. Because you know the one who's guiding your steps, and you trust that his plan is better than your own. That's what prayer does. It moves you from demanding to discerning, from striving to surrendering, from panic to purpose. Let me tell you something. There is nothing more powerful than a person whose heart is aligned with the will of God. They're not easily shaken. They're not tossed by every storm. They don't crumble when the answer is no or not yet, because they know the voice of the shepherd and they've already said yes before he even finishes the sentence. That's the fruit of a life rooted in prayer. And here's what's beautiful. When you begin to pray like that, your desires begin to shift. What used to satisfy you doesn't anymore. What you once chased after, you start walking away from. Your heart begins to long for what pleases God. And guess what happens then? Psalm 37:4 says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Why? Because when you delight in him, your desires become his desires. So if you've been frustrated in prayer, if you've been waiting, wondering, wrestling, maybe it's not a delay in delivery. Maybe it's an invitation to alignment. Maybe God is waiting for you to come, not just with your list, but with your life. To stop saying, bless what I'm doing, and start asking, what are you doing, and how can I be part of it? That's where freedom is found. That's where power is released. Not in trying to bend God's will to fit yours, but in bending your will to fit His, that's when you pray and things start changing, not just around you, but within you. That's when prayer stops being a routine and starts becoming a rhythm of walking with God. So today, don't just pray for a result. Pray for alignment. Pray for transformation. Pray for your heart to beat in sync with heaven. Because when your will aligns with His purpose, you will see God move in ways that go far beyond what you could ever ask or imagine. See, the enemy doesn't care if you go through the motions. He's not intimidated by religion. He's not worried about you showing up to church if you're not showing up in the secret place. But when you become a man or woman of prayer, not just when you need something, not just on Sundays, but daily, consistently, intimately, you become dangerous because prayer doesn't just change your day. It changes the atmosphere around you. It pushes back darkness. It activates heaven. And it draws you closer to the very power source that hell can't touch. One of the greatest tragedies in the church today is that we've normalized prayerlessness. We've made prayer optional. We treat it like a supplement, not a necessity. But prayer is not a side dish, it's the main course. You cannot walk in victory and live disconnected from the voice of God. You cannot discern God's will and never spend time listening to Him. You cannot defeat the enemy while living off someone else's prayers. That's why some of us are tired. That's why we feel confused. That's why we keep falling into the same traps, the same cycles, the same patterns. It's not because God has left us. It's because we've stopped connecting to Him. The Wi-Fi signal is still there, but we're not logging in. We're operating in airplane mode, hoping to land in God's will while we've cut off the very guidance system we need. Let me tell you, prayerlessness is spiritual starvation. You can survive without food for a while, but not forever. You may feel okay for a season, but eventually the effects start to show. You lose strength. You lose clarity. You lose your appetite for the things of God. That's what happens when you go without prayer. You might still function, but you're not thriving. You're not walking in the power God intended for you. And here's what's dangerous. Prayerlessness creates a false sense of control. We start believing we've got this, that we can handle it, that we're strong enough, smart enough, experienced enough. But what happens when the storm comes? What happens when the unexpected diagnosis hits? What happens when the relationship falls apart or the job disappears or the anxiety creeps in at 2 a.m.? That's when you realize what you've been missing. That's when you wish you had stayed connected. Because a storm is not the time to build a foundation. It's the time to stand on one. And if you haven't been praying, you don't have anything to stand on. You're trying to fight spiritual battles with carnal tools, and you're wondering why you're losing. Prayer isn't just about asking God to fix things. It's about preparing for what's coming. It's about staying ready, staying sharp, staying filled. Because there's a war going on that you can't see with natural eyes. There are attacks being launched, assignments being formed, strategies being crafted by the enemy right now against your mind, your family, your purpose. And the only way to fight back is to stay in the presence of God. You don't need a perfect prayer. You need a consistent one. You don't have to be a spiritual giant. You just have to be willing. Get up early, stay up late. Find a quiet place. Turn off the distractions. Talk to Him. Listen for Him. Let Him refill you, redirect you, reshape you. Because every time you do, you become stronger. Every time you do, you gain clarity. Every time you do, you reinforce the wall of protection around your life. Let me tell you something. Some of the breakthroughs you've been waiting on are being held up not because God doesn't want to move, but because you haven't prayed. There are some chains that won't break until you cry out. Some doors that won't open until you knock in faith. Some mountains that won't move until you speak in the authority of prayer. Don't just sit there frustrated. Don't just complain. And don't just pray for yourself. Pray for your children. Pray for your spouse. Pray for your city. Pray for your church. The prayers you pray today can outlive you. They can cover your bloodline. They can shift generations. Don't underestimate what happens when a believer locks into the presence of God and refuses to let go. You don't need to have it all figured out. Just start. Start where you are. Start even if your voice is trembling. Start even if your faith feels small. Just start. Because the only thing more dangerous than not knowing how to pray is not praying at all. And don't think prayer has to feel good to be effective. Some of the most powerful prayers come through tears, through silence, through groaning too deep for words. God hears those prayers. He bottles up those tears. He answers those cries. You don't have to be loud. You just have to be real. This is a call to get back to the secret place, to stop living off yesterday's strength, to stop depending on second-hand revelation, to stop being okay with spiritual emptiness. You were made for more. You were made to walk in power. You were made to live fully connected to your source. And prayer is how you do it. So if you're tired of being stuck, tired of going through the motions, tired of feeling powerless, then it's time to plug back in. Time to draw near. Time to reclaim the power that's already been made available to you. Because a prayerless life is a powerless life.